All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the October 2025 DataBytes. Special treat today. Fermin Ornelas is going to be presenting and sharing a bit about the work that he's been doing and developing some new data modeling for us here to investigate student retention outcomes. Um, this work is in part been influenced by some of the fellowship work that we did with the Strategic Data Project and Harvard's Center for Education Policy Research. They had a toolkit that was on offer to help us kind of investigate student outcomes. And then for me, using kind of some of the foundational elements that came out of that, turn this into something that can be more actionable and implemented here at scale at Rio. And so he'll be presenting today on some of that exploratory work that he did, some of the modeling, and some of the outcomes that he's seen based on what he was able to achieve. So for me, I'm going to take it over to you and share my screen, and you just let me know when to transition.
Okay, you have the slides, right? Okay. All right, well, the whole purpose of this exercise was to extend some of the analysis that we did while working with the SDP group. The SDP group, as we know it, developed a toolkit, and we use that toolkit to do some analysis and make a presentation out of it, a paper out of it, and actually, in retrospective, we should have used that material for this, but it's too late now, so we'll go with what we have for the time being. Can you move to the next slide? So basically, the whole sample was 535 students, and it was focused on 4 certificates: addiction, substance abuse, accounting, paralegal, and programming, right? The window we selected was for people that began the certificate programs between fall 2018 and spring 22. So these were 4 cohorts, and while the SDP suggested, it was a suggestion, not something that was written in stone, that we look at 6 months. We decided to look at the 6 terms. We decided to look at 12 terms because of the fact that many of our students are what is considered non-traditional students. And these are individuals that have one or more characteristics, such as being part-time, being a GED recipient, having dependents, or taking care for an older parent, or having delayed enrollment into college, coming out of high school. So either one of those factors, according to the literature, makes them to be non-traditional students. And I think we got many of those in the certificate programs, because the certificate programs are supposed to be completed at the most in a year. These certificates of average have like 15 courses to get the certificate. And in the next few slides, you will see that they'll take longer to complete beyond what is required. Can we move to the next slide? So based on this data, right, we did the analysis for the SDP, but then I decided, well, wait a minute, if this data is longitudinal, right, then we could take it and build a retention model, see who will stay from one year to the next academically, right? So we'll look at basically what we call 3 cohort term index, where 2 were used to collect the data, and the number in cohort, cohort term index 3 was used to build the indicator, who is actually continue after the first 2 terms. So the total count for each program was 244 for substance abuse, accounting has 109, paralegal had 145, and programming got 37 students. The retention rate was about 70%. The outcome of interest was whether the student was retained or not. At the end from the beginning of the term until the third term. So it wasn't not necessarily the fall. They could be, well, it's actually the fall, but none of them were starting on the same fall, given the fact that we picked between 2018 and 2022. So there was a long, different starting point for each one of those students. The predictors that were in the model were cumulative credits earned, cumulative credits attempted, cumulative GPA, indicators for gender, age, first times in college, and Pell. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, but I just want to jump in really quick and say that one of the really interesting things about this approach that Fermin is using is, as he alluded to, traditionally we look at a lot of students and cohort them based on when they started. And so this type of a model allows us to create kind of an artificial starting point for every student. So regardless of which fall semester they start, we can say their entry point is term 1, and then the analysis looks at all their outcomes thereafter. So it's a way for us to aggregate all these students and create a larger sample size for Fermin to use, and then gives us more ability to kind of look at the totality of the students' outcomes and be able to make some assessments based on that, as opposed to looking at cohort by cohort, which provides some limitations, both in terms of how many students we can look at, and then other factors that might have been influencing their outcomes, environmentally, things like COVID or disruptions in service, et cetera. So this is a really novel approach for us and something that we're going to look to be able to incorporate in other areas of analytics that we're using here. Thanks for me.
Sure. Now, in this slide, we are showing how students are progressing in each of the certificate programs. One thing that stands out is that addiction, substance addiction, the substance addiction certificate is the most successful program of all the three. If you look at it, the blue chart, the blue section of the chart says these are students that are still enrolled. The green indicates students that completed or transferred, and the brown one will suggest that those individuals are no longer enrolled in the program, right? So as you can tell, this is the first program is the most successful compared to the other three. Accounting particularly, maybe because of the complexity of the subject and the amount of work that they have to do, that might be a challenge for them. So if you look at it, I mean, the fact that there's only 15 credits, they should complete them, about 15 credits, I think. I have the list in some other file, right? They should take less to complete, but given what we know about them in terms of being part-time, right? And also you'll see in another chart that the number of earned credits, it's not what the literature recommends. In the literature recommend, let's say, like for example, the program 15 to finish. 15 to finish says, okay, if they take 30 credits in one term, by the fourth term, they should be done. But that's a traditional student. But in our case, we don't have that type of population. And this graph is showing exactly that the students, some of them are persistent, but it's obvious they are going beyond the traditional time that it would take a conventional student to complete that certificate. In fact, some of them go beyond the 1210. We didn't have a way to know that far because we didn't go that far, but some of them have even up to 3, 4, 6 years to finish. Can we go forward, Zach? Now, the model was built, and I'm skipping a lot of information here. A lot of that information on the previous slide was from another set of slides. This is another set of slides that comes out of the model itself. So we're jumping into it, assuming that you can still remember that the variables that were in the model were cumulative credits earned, cumulative credits attempted, GPA, gender, FDIC, Pell. So those were the variables that are in the model. Now the model was built. I'm just gonna say maybe 3 times. Cheyenne didn't want to mention it too much, but I used a random forest model. There was a comparison of 4 or 5, and out of the 4 or 5 models, this is the one that predicted the best. So if you look at it, the training data set had a 93% for the area under the curve. The predictions had an 84% for the testing data set. So that in itself, it says that this is a good model in terms of all the models, and the reason being, I think, it's the fact that the data was a cohort. In other words, all the students that were in that cohort had shared about the same similarity in terms of what the attributes are trying to express and establish a relation with the indicator. The indicator that was whether the student was retaining or not. So the successful indicator, if the student is retained, it's given a 1. If it's not retained, it's given a 0. So we'll go into the next slide and show some of the findings. Here you'll see that this is basically a rank, but it's shown in a chart of how well the variables explain the model, right? As you can tell, the most important variable is cumulative credits earned, followed by cumulative GPA, followed by cumulative credits attempted, and then the indicators. Gender, which will say if female is equal to 1, age indicator, if the individual was less than 35, FDIC, if the student was first time in college or not, and then Pell, if the student was getting some financial aid or not. Can we go to the next slide? So in terms of, again, I'm summarizing here the metrics, right? When a model gets built, these are the metrics that tell you how good a model is. Accuracy is 83%, recall it's 91, precision is at 82, and the F1 score is at 86%. So these are very good indicators because the closer they are to 1, the better the model classifies between both classes in the outcome. One of the classes is he successful or is he retained? And the other one, it's 0, is not retained. So by judging by this criteria, this model, it's doing pretty well. Can we go to the next slide? And here, I'm giving you the simulation of the testing data set. In other words, here we pretend that the model hasn't seen the data, right? In other words, created the model. Once it created the model, the parameter set gets saved And then after that, the testing data set is run with the parameters to get an estimation on what the model will do in a production-like environment. If you look at it, the sample is small because of what we said before, we only had 535 students. But if you look in here, what we want to look in the model is when we get the confusion metrics, we want most of the numbers to align in the diagonal from left to right. So you see here we got 30% on the upper left-hand corner, and the bottom right-hand corner, we got 53%. But the three features to keep in mind here is the off diagonals, because the off diagonals will tell you how well the model is predicting and classifying the students. So if you look at it, the false negative rate is about 5%. The false positive rate, it's about 12%. So it's very low. We have models in the past that didn't do as well as this model. And the reason being, like I said, in the models that we have built in the past, it's everybody. Here, there is more, it's a systematic way of isolating students by their cohort. And that in itself, I think, is the reason that the model tends to classify them better, even when the sample is not as big. So can we go into the next slide? Now, here is another aspect that I try to address when having discussions with advisors in times, which variable is the one that is having the most impact? Or how do I know if the variable, has something to do with the student reality, right? Here, what we have calculated is the impact that each variable has on the outcome of interest. The outcome of interest being, is a student being retained or not, right? So again, if we look in here, we will see the cumulative credit earned has about 8.5 impact on the outcome. That means for every unit that the student earns, the impact on the probability of retention is 8.5%. Interesting, because in the sample, and this is, not only in the sample, but in general, females are coming to college at a higher rates than males. Female, if the student is a female, it has a 5.6 impact on the probability of retention, right? The similar approach, interpretation can be made about cumulative GPA, right? For each unit that the cumulative GPA changes, there is a 3.8 impact on the probability of retention. Same thing can be said for cumulative credit earned. For every credit that the student attempts to take, every 1 unit of credit that the students attempt to take, there is a 3% impact on the probability of retention. And so on, all the way until we get to the bottom. Interestingly, the age indicator has a negative impact of 5%, 5.3%, which means if the student is younger, he's less likely to be retained. And that impact is about 5% on the probability of retention. So the whole idea of doing this is just to give a sense of what is it doing when, let's say, if we put a model into production then, oh my gosh, it's saying it's time to restart. Not now, right? So it's saying that, I lost my train of thought. But the point is that this is the impact that the variables will have on probability. And the whole idea is to give the advisors a sense for what happens when a given variable is in the model, and depending on how important is that variable in the model to predict the outcome of interest, whether it be persistence, whether it be retention. Right? Can we go to the next slide? Now, here we have some graphs, some charts, and it's again trying to stress the fact that of how these variables impact the outcome of interest. If you look in here, this partial dependency for cumulative credits attempted at 15 credits, you got the maximum lift for this variable. And that it agrees with what in the literature people have investigated. That's it. That said, when they did their researchers that have done the analysis, when they pushed the 15 to finish strategy, they were saying if people do 15 credits to finish, that will make, and if they continue at that rate, they'll finish in 2 years, or they'll finish in 4 years if they are attending a university, right? To some degree, this graph validates some of that analysis. Notice that after that, then there is a decline and becomes horizontal. And the next chart is actually telling us that our students might not be able to get to this path of 15 credits. They might attempt 15 credits, right, in this term, but the reality is they might actually be aiming for at least get 6 credits earned. And that's what this chart, the second chart, is saying. Why? Because of the fact that we have the majority of our students, especially at the certificate level, are non-traditional. And again, I'm going to repeat this. Why do we say they are non-traditionals? Because they will have one of the 7 features that I mentioned before, being part-time, having a full-time job, being a GD, being a student that delay enrollment in the college, having dependents, caring for an older parent. So these are the dynamics that our students face. If we don't see them as who they are, obviously we might not be doing the service that we should be doing for them. Pushing them to a 15 credit load, it might not be doable for them. Can we go to the next slide? Now in here, I'm just giving you what happens with GPA. With GPA, we see that the maximum peak of GPA is over 3.5. What is it saying? Again, this is merely an interpretation, so it could be subject to debate. I'm not saying that you have to take my word as I say it, but what he's suggesting is that individuals that are doing well from a GPA standpoint, they might decide, well, I could either, rather than getting the certificate, since I'm feeling comfortable with all the courses and how well I'm doing, maybe I should go and take an associate. Or maybe I should go and look beyond Rio and maybe do something else since I'm doing so well. That's how I interpret this downfall, this decline after 3.5, right? It is suggesting that these students could be doing something else, tempted by the fact that they are performing well. In the next chart, what I'm showing you is just a simple line, because this is an indicator. It's either 0, 1. 1 if the student is FDIC, and 0 if it's not. So it is negative. The slope of this line is negative. And if the slope of this line is negative, it means the relation with the outcome of interest, it's inverse, right? So which means if we have an FDIC student, he's less likely to be retained. He's less likely to go into the next year. So, and that also agrees what has been reported in the literature. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, just a second.
Okay.
Carol raised your hand on the last slide. So, Carol, do you want to jump in and ask your question,
Yeah.
please?
So for me on the slide before, I just had a quick question. If you had the modeling at 15 credits and 6.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do any other modeling like at 12 credits?
No, this is what the data suggests. No,
Okay.
I didn't investigate from 12 credits. No, I did not. But
Yeah, and
this
this
is
was
what it's the data itself. Here there is no manipulation. It's just that this is basically the data set was that used to build the model, the training data set. After the training data set gets processed, then this is I requested, okay, do the charts for me and show me what is going on with that particular variable.
Okay, so it's cumulative credits. It's not saying they're taking 15 in the one semester.
No, it's cumulative.
Okay, got
credit.
it. Thank you.
But it's only 2 terms. Remember, it's only 2 terms. So to some degree, it is a reflection on what is happening. Okay, can we? Now here I got, again, 2 line charts, right? The H indicator, again, a negative relation with respect to the outcome. So if the all he's saying is, if a student is less than 35 years old, he's likely to be retained. Now, how did I pick the 35? Because the average age, and I think also the median age, was very close to being 35. The median, I think, was a little bit over 35, and the mean was 35. So and that's how I picked the indicator. Anybody below? It might have been a good idea also to try just the 25, right? Anybody above 25? But again, this is another indicator of the nature of our students when they go into certificates. These are individuals. I'm not showing it in the data, but there are individuals here that the NSC identifies as having some college but no certificates. And we know there are about 43 million of those out there. So in the gender indicator, we have a positive relationship. Why do we have a positive relationship? Because many of the students are women, and we know that women are tending to go to college more than male students. So it's not a surprise that the relationship between the outcome and the gender indicator, it's positive. Can we go into the next slide? Now, in this part, I'm just going to talk about, this is just a pilot and an idea that came out of my training in AI and things like that. But we build the model. Once we build the model, then I thought, okay, I built an application while taking the training. So I should take that knowledge and try to build an application for us. So this is basically a 2-piece development. One was a backend application using Flask, right? Where the output of the model gets saved. I wanna clear that no, the data is highly aggregated at this level. There are no records, no IDs. No, this is just highly aggregated. The model gets developed in the local machine, and once it's developed, then what goes to Hugging Face is the aggregate of the model. Basically, the parameter set and the model specification. Those are the things that go in there. There is no specific record of anybody, of no student. So that's one component that gets, like I said, it gets assigned a Docker space, the model is containerized, and in theory, we could take that application anywhere, whether it's Azure or whether it's Heroku, and implement it. At the front end, I've been working with Streamline before, right? So here, there is a front end application, and the way it works, these are two applications that are decoupled. In other words, the development for the back end is independent of the front end. I can work on the front end without touching the back end, or I can work on the back end without touching the front end. So that makes it more flexible, and you don't need to set up a virtual environment, because when you set a virtual environment, you have to bring every package. Let's say if we're going to use Python, I always have to bring every package into the app. Here, you only bring what is needed. There is a file called requirements text, and that file only includes the minimum packages to get both applications running. Ideally, what we would like to do is have it where the front end could actually go to the server, pull the data from the server, send it to the back end, get the scores, and then put the scores out in a table in the server that we could use to create reports for whoever wants to look at the results, whether it be advisors or whether it be faculty or instructors, right? But we haven't done that yet. I mean, the way we do it here, and this will become a little bit more clear, is we try to do things within the server. So I'm attaching just a layout in the next slide to show you what it would look like at the Hugging Face. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, here is what it looks like at the Hugging Face, right? Like I said, there is a front-end retention application, and there is a back-end retention application. If you were to click in here, then you'll get the things displayed. In the case of the front end, we'll get what is going to come in the next slide. But both ends, like both applications, like I said, they talk to each other, but they are independent, which means they can be modified in isolation and tested before they actually get rolled out. Can we go into the next one? Now here, it's a simple one, right? It's just a simple, all it does, Streamlines sends the request to the backend looks at the request and say, okay, I'm gonna upload the parameters, I'm gonna upload the logic for the model, and I'm just gonna send you the score. So the backend sends the score. If the user were to click on predict, he'll get an outcome where it'll say, okay, student is retained or student is not retained, right? In some other versions, I actually had the score. What was the score for the student? But here, since it's just basically a demo, I just wanted to give everybody an idea on what it would be like if we ever decide to go through this route. Given, like I said, security concerns, implications of sharing data, this is not practical at this point. But here, the user can upload a file or can upload specific data on a given student, and it will get the score for that student if it's only a student. But if it gets a file, it could be a CSV or it could be an Excel file, then the whole file gets scored. And once it's scored, then of course, download it, take it anywhere, back to a system, or take it to its office and look at how well the model has predicted the outcome of interest, which is, again, retain or not retain. Can we go to the next one? Okay, so now we come to the end. So I got 40 minutes? So I've got 20 minutes. So you got time for some lunch, or you brought your lunch and just need it. Well, I do the talking, right? Again, the models were compared and tested for performance on 535 students that were enrolled in substance abuse and addiction level 1, accounting, paralegal, and programming. The attributes that have the most impact again was credits earned with an 8.5% impact, followed by gender with a 5.6%, and cumulative GPA by 3.8. In fact, the two variables that explain the most in the model are credits earned and cumulative GPA. And that again agrees with what other researchers have found out in their retention studies. The cumulative credits earned and cumulative GPA, and of course, when they have high school GPA, it's a good predictor also, but mostly for persistence, which means from one term to the next, high school GPA, it's a good predictor. But we don't have it, obviously. For the graphical analysis, we said that younger students, less than 35 years old, and first-time in college students have a higher likelihood of not being retained. Right? Well, if the student is a female, well, has a higher probability or a higher likelihood of being retained. Right? Grades attempted again reach maximum impact at 15 credits. Credits earned reach a maximum at 6 credits. Cumulative GPA, it's over 3.5. And I made this speculation that students above that level of GPA might go for a certificate or might opt for transferring. By the way, many of these students, like I said, go beyond the normal time frame that we considered in the study, suggesting, and the number of credits, before I forget, the number of credits that they take. So that also suggests that they complete their studies and certificate studies, and they continue taking credits beyond what is expected for the certificate. Right? Again, I developed a back-end application using Flask and the front-end application using Streamlit. Having said that, in reality, the model is already uploaded in the server, and pretty soon will be tested on the production side to make actual predictions. So that's pretty much where we are. And I'm at 45 minutes, so we got 15 minutes. If anybody has any questions, I could say more, I could say that we have 43 million students that have some college but no degree. I could say that there are 712,000 certificates that would need to be issued according to the University of study by the University George Washington University, but 2032, and according to Korn Ferry, I think it's called Korn Ferry, the number of jobs the number of workers that will be needed in 2030, which is not far, in the US is about 600,000 to 1.2 million. According to them, all of the countries except for India will have a deficit of individuals with skill type A. Type A means highly trained, highly sophisticated, likely about a bachelor degree, and type B and type C will be basically middle and lower scale, which means that our students will be in either one, B and C, right? That contradicts the studies that Georgetown University has done, which claims that there is a need, there will be a need, but they say by 2032 in middle skills and in areas such as management, nursery, teaching, and even trucking. So some of that references will come in the draft that I'm working on. And with that, I'm going to close it. And if you have any questions now or later, you're welcome to ask me or, let me know later one way or another. Thank you, everybody.
Well, and thank you so much, Fermin, for sharing all the work that you've been doing. And, just to put it into context beyond kind of the study itself, this is an extension of some of the work that Fermin's already been doing in supporting advisors and leveraging other models to help understand students' likelihood of moving from semester to semester. And so this was the natural next step, and then building a model that would provide some insight into the retention dynamic and how likely we can expect a student to return a year on from any given point in time. So, it's important to understand both that outcome, but then also different insights that we can glean from the modeling that Fermina shared around how we can coach students around different enrollment strategies and different factors that we're seeing showing up in the data that tell us that a student is more likely to achieve a desired outcome, like continuing their enrollment fall over fall, spring over spring, whenever they start the institution. So lots more work to come on that. And I've got my co-conspirators in here, Maya and Aaron, on the Student Success Academy, and we've talked about it in there as well, of being able to leverage more predictive analytics and early alert tools. And so these are tools that are available in the toolkit to lean into and help support our advisors, counselors, success coaches, and others to be able to gain insight into their caseloads and identify students who need support and interventions before they end up stopping out. So appreciate the work, Fermin. I know you've got interest in publishing some of this and sharing the literature that you've generated and then operationalizing the model internally so that we can put it into the hands of everybody who's working hard to support our students. So thanks everybody for being here. We've got some time left if there's any questions or conversation that we want to have, but just wanted to shout out Fermin and thanks again for all the hard work and innovation that you're bringing to the analytics work here at the college.